All right, thank you everybody. So thanks all so much for joining us today on this very important topic. It's so good to see so many of your faces. The mission of the Leadership Collier Foundation of the Greater Naples Chamber is to activate the potential of leaders, people like you, to help build a stronger Collier County. And the importance of fostering equity is certainly a critical topic as we work toward this mission. But before we begin, I'd like to first start off by thanking our investors of the Leadership Collier Foundation that allow us to grow our work in building leadership and growing our next generation of leaders, our next generation of talent that will be the leaders of tomorrow. So first we have our Leadership League investors, Hallstatt, Arthrex, Jan and Kim Cantor, and Carl and Alice Sheffield. We have our talent champions, the Naples Children in Education Foundation, the Richard M. Schultz Family Foundation, Farm City Barbecue, and Sunshine Ace Hardware's Big Green Egg Fest. And then I also want to thank all of you, our alumni that pay your dues annually, and our newest LCF lifetime members. Your support is critical now more than ever. Thank you. So today we are so incredibly honored to have President Gregory Haile. He's president of Broward College, chair of Leadership Florida, and he's here to discuss with us today how leaders can foster diversity, equity, and inclusion. As the leader of one of the most diverse higher education institutions in the state, President Haile has worked to address issues of equity through the creation of Broward UP, the college's new business model that is focused on removing barriers to increase higher education attainment in the South Florida community. Joining President Haile as our moderator today, I would also like to introduce Cotrenia Hood, graduate of Leadership Collier 2013, executive business coach at Steel Bleu, and a founding member of the LCF Alumni Association's new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Cotrenia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda, and my fellow Leadership Collier alumni for joining us today in this amazing discussion around fostering diversity and inclusion in the workplace. I'm excited about the discussion and President Haile being with us today. If you have not had an opportunity to hear this gentleman speak, you are in for a treat. So I'm excited to have you, President Haile, with us today. Thank you for your time.
It is absolutely my pleasure. It's great to see everyone. Let me give a quick hello to my friend Michael Wynn, who I haven't seen, Class 30, Leadership Florida. Dr. Cam Patton as well. Great to see you and great to see everyone. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We titled this meeting Fostering Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace, but what do these words, or how do these words, diversity and inclusion, how are they pivotal to you at a very early age?
So one of the things this question gives me the opportunity is to level set just a little bit around my background and how even as I grew up as a child, there were essentially roles and elements of diversity, equity, inclusion that were taking place that I couldn't possibly be aware of as I was living through it. As we are very excited, we were talking earlier about how lucky we are in light of some of the weather challenges folks are seeing across the country. And of course, our prayers go out to all of them. I did not get to grow up in sunny South Florida. I actually grew up in South Jamaica, Queens, New York. I don't know how much, okay, I saw one thumbs up, Howard, I love that. So I grew up there, and I actually grew up there during a pretty difficult time. The neighborhood continues to be a very underserved, very challenged neighborhood. I grew up there in the 80s through the mid 90s at the height of the crack epidemic. Just to paint a little bit of a picture for you, there were bars on every window of my home. When I looked across the street from my home, there were drugs being sold and all kinds of illegal activity going on. I lost friends to the left and the right. And my mother did something, please, I think the statute of limitations has passed. I see two sheriffs there. My mother did something that would probably get her in trouble today, but she actually lied about my address so I could go to school in a better neighborhood. And so I would go through the projects and I'd get on the bus. This was starting in the 3rd grade. I'd get on the bus for about 45 minutes and I'd go to the school in this much more affluent neighborhood. And probably one of the best pictures I could paint for you of the affluent nature and the divide that I was experiencing, the lack of equity that I was experiencing without even knowing it, was if I turn you to 1989, I was in 6th grade graduating from elementary school. And I said to a friend who was from the neighborhood that the elementary school I attended was in, I said, "Isn't this amazing? We're going to be the last class of the decade." And this friend, Dom, says to me, "No, we're going to be the last class of the millennium because we're going to graduate college in 1999. And this was the first time I had ever heard the word college. And when I think about the divide that it exemplifies, I think about the reality that I was hearing about about college for the first time, not just in the 6th grade, but from another 6th grader who knew exactly what year they were going to graduate. Perhaps because of the exposure that he had, surely maybe there were conversations at the dinner table with his family. I did not have those conversations. My father, my biological father, stopped out of school in the 6th grade. My mother stopped at high school. I have about 130 cousins, if you can believe that. And I would go on to be the first person in my family to graduate from college. These were not conversations though that were readily had as a child. And then you compound that with the reality that I was going to school in one neighborhood that just looked so different than mine. In my neighborhood, and this explains a large part why my mother lied about my address. I've had bullets come through my living room window. You had to go through metal detectors to get to the movie theater. When you went to the bodegas or the little stores, you had to have 2 layers of bulletproof glass to traverse before you actually able to purchase whatever you were purchasing. So these were things that were just characteristic of how I lived, but I didn't necessarily think anything differently about that until I would spend some time in this other neighborhood. So that was an important pivot point for me in a recognition of equity and diversity and inclusion. And then I'll share 2 more quick ones, both ironically related and perhaps not ironically related to higher education or education. This false address narrative, I could not, and my mother could not perpetuate beyond middle school. And so in high school, I actually ended up going to the school that I was zoned for, that was in my neighborhood, Springfield Gardens High School. It would be in the first cohort of 40 schools that would require metal detectors in New York City. It had the highest HIV rate, highest teen pregnancy rate, and the dropout rate was extraordinary. But still, after my mother and my stepfather shopped me to every school possible, I did not have the grades to get in, or I wasn't zoned for them. So I went to Springfield Gardens High School, and I probably could tell you a story for every day that I was there that had nothing to do with academia, but some form of self-preservation. I did end up graduating, thank goodness. I graduated with a 2.7 GPA, and yet I was in the top 15% of my class. A very different dynamic than I hoped for my children, and perhaps you hope for yours. But academic rigor was not something that we focused on. It was the focus was elsewhere. So when I decided I wanted to go, and I consider that, an important point of the equity discussion and diversity and inclusion discussion, that experience I had in high school. And then I ended up going off to college, and I did not know anything about applying for college. My institution that I attended high school did not talk to me about going to college. I think only of the 300 people who were in my senior class, about 20 of us went to some form of post-secondary education. I ended up going to Arizona State University, 2,400 miles away from my home. And I only had 2 reasons for going there. One is because it was far, frankly. I wanted to get as far away from where I lived as I could, and it was the only avenue that I could imagine would provide the opportunity to do so. But 2 is one of equity as well, of one I did not think of at the time. You had to meet 2 of 3 criteria primarily to get into Arizona State University. You had to have a decent SAT score, which I had. You had to have a GPA of at least a 3.0 or 3.25, which I did not have, and which is probably why I don't even remember what the GPA threshold was. Or you had to be in the top 25% of your class. And so here I was in the top 25% of my class with my 2.7 GPA. And I find my way to Arizona State University. And almost a bit of an aside, I actually went to Arizona State sight unseen. I did not know that you were supposed to visit colleges before you went there. I simply had no one to turn to, and no one gave me that example that I could live by. So I showed up, and the thing that scared me the most, and as odd as it may sound, I described to you what it was like to go into my high school. We had multiple layers of metal detectors. A lot of people remember the names of their teachers from high school. I remember the names of my security guards. I remember going into the movie theater. I remember the bodegas. And then I showed up at ASU and they had no metal detectors. And I cannot tell you how uncomfortable I felt without having metal detectors, because all I could think about was, how could we be safe here? And of course, often when I think about our students here at Broward College, I think about the priority of safety, which is one of the reasons I am always humbled to be in the presence of sheriffs and those who are living a life designed to protect those who need us most. But this has been an interesting journey for me as I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it has pervaded my life in some way or the other, which gives me, again, greater pleasure to have this conversation with you today.
What a profound story and journey that you've been on to get to where you are today, and to be in a position both within Broward College and the Leadership Florida program to really lead this discussion around diversity and inclusion, and to specifically talk about that within our workplace. I think that it's important that we ask ourselves, why now? Companies have policies. I'm sure all of our companies have a policy or two on diversity in the workplace. We even go the extra mile to showcase, what our organizational diversity looks like. But it seems that the business community at this point is being asked to take diversity to another level. Why do you feel that is so?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to start for us about 2.5 years ago. So I stepped into the presidency effectively on July 1st, 2018, and I've been at the college since September 12th of 2011. But when I stepped into the role, one of the things that we all were living was a very tight labor market. We had low unemployment rates. Broward County had a 2.8% unemployment rate. I'm sure Naples was somewhere around there, or perhaps even better. And one of the things that I remember talking to our business leaders about was this tight labor market. So if you work in post-secondary education, it's very difficult to go a conversation with a business leader without that leader telling you that they are short on talent, right? And they're looking for it, and this is what they need. And I would have a very succinct response. I would say, where are you looking? Because despite the fact that there is this tight labor market and 2.8% or 2.7% unemployment, I could show you communities that have 10, 12, and 15% unemployment, and they would do anything to work for you. They would do anything to have just the opportunity to get to know your industry and to develop the tools and skills to do that. And that's where our post-secondary institutions can play a dramatic role in helping bridge the divides that we know exist. So the education component becomes really critical in understanding where those opportunities lie. Now I fast forward to today, and obviously there has been a reckoning unlike any that, certainly in my lifetime, and perhaps the lifetime of my parents, even, and I talk to my mother routinely about what we're living. But part of the reality is there is a reckoning that has led to just a new interest and impulse in recognizing the challenges and addressing them, right? And I'll say the education around this by way of forums such as these and the thousands of others that have taken place has been just incredible, right? People are understanding some of the recent history of things like redlining. They're understanding the history of the role of housing and wealth building, and why so many people were deprived of the opportunity to build that wealth, and why that lack of wealth now leads to things like lack of education and lack of prosperity. All these dots that are now being connected simply weren't connected even 12 months ago. And now you have this incredible growth in understanding and connectedness. And this is in part why I think so many are reconciling this challenge with activity, right? We kind of joked earlier before this call, for those who just joined, about what leadership looks like. Leadership is not a title, it is an activity. It is about deciding that something needs to be done, and we have to have a will to do something about it. And so I think people are exemplifying that will, and corporations are exemplifying that will in ways that, again, I haven't seen, in large part because of that education, because of that understanding of the history. And I won't deny the emotional, compelling nature of it as well. We felt the emotion. We all feel compelled to do something about it. Most of us feel compelled to do something about it. And so we're seeing that activation. We're seeing leadership unlike any that we've had before.
You know, something you said that resonated with me, and I'm sure with others, because I saw a lot of heads go down at the same time, which is leadership is not a title, it's an activity. It's pushing us towards something. And I think that quite often we get in the exercise of leading that we sometimes miss that there is activity that's involved, that we have to be proactive. What I would like to know is, now that we know that it is an activity, how do we progress forward beyond our policies around diversity and inclusion? What do companies need to do to advance equity in their organizations?
So look, a policy, it's only what it's, when you activate it, when you have it published somewhere. And a lot of us, unfortunately, look at our policies once every year or whatever it may be. Without accountability, it's going to be difficult to see any growth around this, right? So when we think about our organizations, we think about ourselves, I think about, where's the self-audit requirement that comes with this work? How are we doing at making sure that there's actually growth in the aspirations that we purport to seek? So let's just start with when you are in your respective boardrooms, or when you are in your respective all hands meetings, what does it look like, right? And to me, that's the floor, right? And we need to be beyond it, but we're not. We need to continue to grow in this. But the floor is, what do we look like? What perspectives do we have? How do we make sure that the perspectives are in the room? But that's only part of it, right? And frankly, it's not even close to enough. But if you look at yourselves as an organization and you recognize on its face, if you will, that you don't have the basic level of diversity representing your community that you're serving, representing your customers, your audience, and making sure that it's reflective in its diversity, that's something we need to look at going after right away. We can talk about what it looks like to go after that, but you have to first have that understanding to be able to look at it. Now, here's the hard part. When you recognize the shortfalls you have, are you willing to actually do anything about it? And that's where you have to be aggressive. You have to decide, I have this number, decide what the data points are going to be, and decide where the achievement needs to be, and actually invest in being able to do that and hold yourselves accountable for it. And accountability looks different in different organizations. Sometimes accountability is compensation. That's okay, right? If it's important to you, you'll let the world know, you'll invest in it, and we'll speak with our budgets, we'll speak with our resources, but we have to be able to do that. There's a great saying, it's not mine, but it's around, you can offer someone an invitation to the party, right? That's diversity. It's when you walk up to them and ask them to dance with you that you actually have inclusion. And so how often as leaders and organizations are we actually soliciting and we're saying, I need your thoughts because your thoughts are not mine. I tell our team all the time, there is no monopoly on good ideas. I don't have them all. None of my team leaders have them all. I reach out to all 5,000 of our employees and I say, if you have an idea, I don't care what crevice it's coming from in this organization, we need to make sure that those ideas are on the table because every idea is valued. And we need to ensure that there's a diverse nature of those ideas because there are certain perspectives that I simply don't have and our leadership team doesn't have. And if you do it really well, you make sure your leadership team is reflective of this as well. You also make sure that everyone knows that they are encouraged to share ideas. We talk about psychological safety quite a bit. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Amy Edmondson's work. Amy Edmondson is a Harvard Business School professor and has written so much on psychological safety. And it really is about having a culture or our environment that allows for everyone to speak without repercussion, without being judged. But you have to create the environment that everyone can speak and that those who are speaking are coming from diverse perspectives and diverse backgrounds. And you have to be willing to wear that very publicly, particularly as a leader, but as an organization as well. So the diversity, yes, is key. You have to have the right people there. The accountability, though, is so much greater, right? Being able to say, this is where we are, this is where we need to go, and we are going to hold ourselves accountable for actually getting there. And then allowing, by way of ensuring that people can talk freely and to speak up around some of these challenges that we know exist. And I'll be the first to tell you, I can't, as the CEO or president of this organization, see or know everything, but we have to empower people who see things that I don't see to say something so that we can address it, right? So that we can address it.
Policies without accountability is void. That is amazing, because I think so often, and a thought that we should definitely take away, because we don't. We have all these policies on a shelf, and sometimes we don't address them until there's crisis. I know that living here in Collier, we are so blessed. We have a beautiful community. We experience beauty on all kinds of levels living here, both within our environment and the people that are here. How do we move from our vision of experiencing beauty to intentionally interweaving diversity in every aspect of our business community?
Yeah. So one of the things I'll try to and I'm not going to be evasive here, but I want to make sure we understand every community is different, right? And so one of the things that I like to think about, and I certainly think about it with my own communities, I never try to do anything that's cookie cutter that someone else has done. It's important to learn what folks have done and see what components of it can be readily applicable to my own community or my own institution for that matter. But I do try to start with, what are the assets of my own community? Who are the people? What are the levers that we can be most conscious of? Now, one parallel that I'm surely don't know enough that I need to know about Collier, but one thing that's already readily apparent is that this is a very collaborative community. And one of the things that I know that Broward College can't do, and no single institution can do, is tackle a multi-decade long problem by itself. We need to, especially one that is so multifaceted. And so what we need to be thinking about is how we can engage in the kind of collaboration that can have the greatest possible impact. And so I'll give you an example. So Raj Chetty is a friend. Raj is also out of Harvard, R-A-J Chetty, C-H-E-T-T-Y. Raj is actually the youngest tenured professor of economics in Harvard's 400-year history. He's probably going to win the Nobel Prize at some point. And one of the things that he has developed is what's called an online opportunity atlas. So you can literally type in any zip code in America. Tessa, you may be familiar with it. I see you nodding your head. You can type in any zip code in America, and you can see the likely income outcomes based on the zip code that you grow up in, right? So I just want to, as un-American as that sounds, where you grow up in is the greatest determining factor to your likelihood of income, your income and income outcomes. So what we did at Broward College was we said we're going to focus on 6 zip codes because we believe that education is the most important fulcrum to success. But we didn't say that in isolation. We said we need to work with other organizations as well. So long story short, what we're doing and I'm co-leading an organization called Prosperity Broward, is we've brought about 40 organizations together. And what we've said is, and these organizations with a mutual interest around addressing equity and identifying how we can collectively concentrate on those communities that need us most, particularly from an equity perspective. And so the 40 of us have come together. What we've done is we've identified imperatives that the 40 of us collectively know we need to achieve. And one of those imperatives is trying to get income outcomes in those most challenged communities above what we call ALICE levels. ALICE is an acronym for asset limited, income constrained, but employed. These are people who are employed, but making still either just over or less than the poverty line. And so the 40 of us are working together, number one. Number two, what does working together look like? The 40 of us are actually designing our strategic plans so that each of us has a component of this work to live by, right? It's not just Broward College in isolation. It is the idea that the 40 of us, and there'll be more, frankly, will identify how in their plans, the work to address the needs of those communities, those same communities that the other 39 are working on, can be addressed, and those plans will be measurable. And I'll offer one more point. I'm sure you have a local business organization where it's, the top CEOs or whatever it may be. We have one of those too. And what we've been able to do is work with them. We, Broward College, have been able to work with them And what they've decided to do is that they're going to make equity their #1 priority. And they've again attached measurable goals to the tune of saying those 6 zip codes, we are going to hire this many hundreds of people from those 6 zip codes. We are going to offer apprenticeships to this many people from those zip codes, right? So you have this, again, recognition that no institution, individual, business does this alone. You recognize the coalescence required to address a problem or challenge of this magnitude, and then making sure that you have measurable outcomes. And I'll say one more that I didn't anticipate mentioning, but part of the reality is too, is you have to be in it for the long haul. You don't address decades worth of challenges with a 2-year attempt. This has to be part of our infrastructure. You know, I've told this institution, frankly, this is what when I was joining, when I was applying for this position, one of the things I talked to our board about, as dramatic as it may sound for someone seeking a new position, is the need to change our model, because you have to address this with longevity in mind, not with initiatives. Initiatives have a beginning, they have an end. What we don't ever want, particularly in our communities, in this state and in our country, is the idea that equity has an end. This is something that we need to be pursuing in perpetuity to ensure that those opportunities continue. And of course, even more importantly, perhaps today, is addressing the inadequacy of how we've addressed the challenges historically.
Collaboration is key. And I think that as a community, we do a lot of collaborating. What we would, I think, benefit from in your conversation and your answer is having those measurable goals and understanding that this is for the long haul. I often think, I guess you can shift over to a more personal ideal around diversity and inclusion. But before I do that, I want to let you guys know that you can go into the chat and pose any questions that you may have. Amanda is watching that and recording those questions that you can pose to President Haile at the end of our discussion. I find often that we think it's someone else's charge when it comes to fostering equity and inclusion and diversity. We think it's maybe the responsibility of the owner of our company or supervisor or the HR department. We don't take the onus upon ourselves. How do we as individual leaders within our organizations, within our communities, within our sphere of influence, foster diversity and inclusion within those circles?
Yeah. So I mentioned the self-audit for a corporation or a business or nonprofit, whatever it may be. I would recommend it for ourselves, right, as individuals. Have we taken it upon ourselves to learn, to understand? You know, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but it is critically important to ask ourselves, how well do we understand the challenges and the persistence of them? You know, one of the things I talk to folks all the time about, frankly, is you know, our state colleges and community colleges around the country. And what we don't talk about enough is that, and I don't know if you've heard of this, but there was a commission on higher education in 1947 by President Harry Truman. And the reason why the commission was formed, because there was a tremendous misalignment between the skills that existed and the jobs that were available, same conversations we have today. And it was also tremendous inequity. And in this commission report, and I'll use the words of the report, we need to address the lack of equality for the Negro, right, which is the minority population that was most prevalent back then. It said that we need to make sure that success is not determined solely by the father's income. Speaking to wealth, right, these challenges. And so when we understand from a higher ed perspective, and certainly others, some of the history, it allows us to better understand how to manage those challenges. That's a perspective I truly believe in. So that self-audit, do we understand it enough? And have we taken the time to engage? And then I just think about our behaviors too. Who do we spend our time with? Do we take the time to spend time with people who don't look like us or who are not from the same place as we are. There's I'm sure everyone has a LinkedIn account. LinkedIn has, they have research that has been fantastic about the power of connections. And one of the things that they do, I try to remember this and get this right, the zip code that you grow up in has a 3x effect on your success. The college that you go to has another 3x effect on your success. And then the first job that you have has another, I think it's 2x success on your effect on your success. And if you have all 12 of those things, all three of those things, then you have a 12x impact on your own success. And so you see the power of relationships, just that manifesting itself. I remember when I had become a young lawyer or a new lawyer, and I remember folks who I had just met, we had gotten along really well. These folk, they were 20 years my senior, maybe more, 30 years my senior, and they took me around and introduced me to everyone, right? They were just kind to me, and we had a great relationship. And so are you making sure that you're introducing someone who doesn't have the opportunity to someone that you know? We know the power of relationship. We know the power of one of you saying to someone in authority that I trust this young person, or I trust this person from this community, or I trust whoever it may be, in the power of that. And we know this. We know this world. The people on this call know this world well enough that if I send a text message to one of you, if I send a text message to Grace and I said, Grace, I really want you to take a phone call from someone, or Donna or Andres or any one of you, you would do it. And so I ask that we all think about, do we do that? Do we have our own relationships with people that otherwise we may not, and who otherwise they don't have the relationships to the networks that we have? And what role do we play in helping that? I remember, I've been blessed with a lot of mentors. I remember a boss of mine, just a great leader at a law firm that I worked at. And I had been working at the firm for maybe 2 or 3 months. And I said to him, now this person is just incredibly influential around the state. And I said, hey, I need a connection to a member of Congress to be a keynote speaker at an event that I'm hosting. And he said, oh, okay. He goes, he still had a Rolodex. This was 15 years ago, but he said, here, just pick who you want, right? I knew him for 2 months, and he said, pick who you want. And he was going to call them no matter what, no matter who it was that I picked. That's the power and influence that every one of us has, right? To varying extents, but we all have that. Now, how many times have we leveraged that for someone who can't even imagine that kind of connection, who can't even imagine that kind of relationship? That's the kind of thing that we could do in a matter of minutes that can change a life, that can change an aspiration. And it's the right thing to do. And somebody's probably done it for all of us. So those things are not hard, right? Let's educate ourselves and let's create the opportunity for someone else, even if it is just a phone call or a text.
Well, I'm taking the charge of leveraging my influence in 2021 for someone who would never have that opportunity. Thank you for, putting that in words that I think many of us feel and even do, but are not intentional about. So thank you for that. As we dig deeper into our roles as leaders in this committee, the DEI, which I'm excited to be a part of, we believe that partnerships are critical. You're the president of Broward College, as we've talked about before, a highly ranked college in the US by a number of prestigious publications. Tell us a bit about the college and how important it is to you and obviously at the college to partner with other organizations around diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, so it's probably one of the most critical things we do, and that is partnership, because as I've mentioned before, no institution, no matter how large it is, no matter how many awards it has won, whatever it may be, no institution can take on a challenge of this magnitude by itself. And it has to, and all of us have to have the humility to understand that. We have to be willing to say, I don't need to be the lead on this, that we don't have to be the only ones to do this, that we can do it together. And I think if you're really trying to accomplish something, that's the way to get it done. But Broward College, for those who need a little bit of a framework or overview, we have about 60,000 students. We are one of the largest institutions in America. We are an open access institution, so we are historically a community college. We started offering baccalaureate degrees in 2007, excuse me. And we are a very diverse institution. We have about 150 countries of origin represented among our student body. We have 50 languages spoken among our student body. We actually have 17,000, close to 17,000 Black students, which is actually larger than the largest HBCU. We have about 20,000 Hispanic students. So we're very diverse by all accounts. We're actually quite affordable. We have a credit cost of $83 per credit, if you can believe that. And it's a highly accessible institution. So just like I asked all of you to think about that self-audit and how you are doing and why we exist. And I've told you why we exist from a historical perspective. But one of the things that I challenge our folks to do when I first stepped into this role is to ask ourselves, are we truly accessible? And when we think about that accessibility, it's, are we helping those who need us the very most? So I told you a story earlier today about how I learned about college in the most fickle and fortuitous manner. To the contrary, I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old daughter. They will never remember the first time they learned about college. I've been talking about it since the day they were born. They've been on college campuses. Other than Broward College, they've been on many. And if you ask my 5-year-old what college she'd like to go to, she'd give you a few that she's considering. And that's the ideal, very different than what I experienced. So I asked our folks, how do we make it impossible for every community not to see the opportunity for post-secondary education? Again, recognizing post-secondary education is the fulcrum for so much. Every economist in the world will tell you, the greater post-secondary attainment you have, the higher your salary is on average. The greater post-secondary attainment you have, the longer you live on average. The less likely you are to go to prison, the less likely you are to be unemployed, the less likely you are to stay unemployed. All of these things come back to post-secondary attainment. And so there are these communities that we exist to serve. And if I were to show you a map of where Broward College was located, we had 11 locations, excuse me, the brick and mortar sites, and I showed you the 6 zip codes that I would argue need us most, you would see no overlap. And so what we've been able to do, and this is work we call Broward Up, recognizing the unlimited potential of every community, we had to ask ourselves, if we are going to focus on equity and be an organization that lives a life of equity, we have to address it by ensuring that we are removing or ameliorating, at the very least, the barriers that the people who we exist to serve most are facing. For us, that's meant in the last 2.5 years, partnering with organizations, going to nonprofits, going to municipalities, all of which exist, going to libraries, public libraries, all of which exist in the hearts of those most challenged communities, and asking them to collaborate. And that collaboration has looked like us saying, we want to provide post-secondary opportunity and engagement in the heart of the communities that need us most. We have students with technology infrastructure challenges, they have transportation challenges, and they simply don't have the time between the 2 jobs and the kids that they're taking care of to get to our campuses. But if we're in the heart of those communities, now we've eliminated or at least ameliorated those barriers, and we don't do it without those partners. So to the tune of now 19 different new locations, I told you we had none, 19 different new locations in the heart of the communities that need us most. None of that happens without collaboration and partnership. Every one of those partners has said yes to us. There are more partners who we've actually had to say no to simply because of the magnitude of the engagement. Well, we will get to them, but we had to engage in the outreach, we had to engage in the understanding, and we had to engage in the partnership opportunities if we were going to make a dent in this. And we are now making a dent in this. In the last 2 years, we've served over 2,500 students in the hearts of those communities. We have our partners who are coming up with their own new ways. One partner, the city of West Park, they said to us, you know what, do you have any flags, Broward College? And we said, why? We don't. Why? Because we want to raise the flag of Broward College on our municipal flagpole so people in the community know that college is for them and the opportunity exists. Now, to no surprise, I'm sure to any of you, these are communities with very high unemployment and a corollary low post-secondary attainment. So if we are going to address the most important equity outcome that we can think of, and that is a better income over their lifetime by way of post-secondary education, we have to make sure that they know that the opportunity is readily available. We had another city that came to us and said, why don't we do murals in our community of going to college, so people who may not be having the conversation at the dinner table between their home and the bus stop can see this sign that says college is for you. It's things like that that have a material impact. Hard to measure, I'll admit, but it's things like that that raise the consciousness of the opportunity, which we all know, as by way of the conversation I've shared with my daughter, they will never remember, but they know it's there, right? They know that these conversations are having a permeating impact on their interest and inevitably the outcomes.
Well, I am really excited about this conversation, and I sense that so is our Leadership Collier participants today, because we're getting a ton of questions. So I'd like to shift over and answer some of those questions so that we can get them involved and engaged in their thoughts. Amanda?
Thanks, Cotrenia, and thank you, President Haile. I'd like to first start off, I'm just going to call on some names, and I would love for you if you could unmute yourself and simply have that question with President Haile yourself to make this as interactive as possible. So Michael Wynn, could we start with you? You had a question?
Sure. Greg, first of all, thank you again for sharing your incredible, inspiring story. Also making XXX Class 30, Leadership Florida incredibly proud, and also appreciate your service on the Atlanta Federal Reserve board as well. So thank you,
Michael.
So one of my questions was, you talked about customizing these strategies, for the communities. But oftentimes that can be a little bit daunting, kind of knowing where to start. The Florida Chamber has their Prosperity Initiative. So what I was wondering is if you had some advice on whether we are better off kind of taking an existing initiative that has a greater chance for sustainability and already some of the, the kind of structure in place, and then kind of customizing that, for our community, or is there another path that we should be looking at for, kind of our success?
All right. So it's a very fair question, Michael. I'm very involved with the Florida Chamber, very involved with their Prosperity Initiative. And they have just an extraordinary amount of data on this work. And it speaks to some of the Chetty work that I mentioned earlier, which I know they're very familiar with and very supportive of. And I think one of the things that, to the extent you can, is to think about leveraging the data and the information for your community to have a consistent understanding of. And that's one of the things that the Chamber does so well, because not only is it reputable, but it has fantastic resources to this regard. If you can get, and this is my perspective that we've been able to leverage, get the community at large to bind around a single, I'll call it library of information at least, right? So do we really understand collectively what Collier County is facing? And when we have that collective understanding, and there's brilliant people, then you start to understand, okay, then you start to problem solve, right? Then you try to get to a place and you start leveraging resources and figuring out, what assets are going to be best leveraged to address these challenges. And of course, inevitably you get the right people and the right folks in place. But I would not discount at all. In fact, I'd highlight the unifying data that exists and really try to build coalescence around that. And then, and I'm a big proponent of this, you'll never hear me say, just pick up something cookie cutter and put it in my backyard. I used to, one of the things I used to do is I served on the board of an organization called Free the Slaves, which was it was a global anti-human trafficking organization. And their focus was ending human trafficking in Asia, the Americas, and in South Africa. Very different countries, very different. And I'm painting this picture because it's starker, right? Very different countries, very different government structures, very different levels of fragility. So you couldn't possibly say, I'm going to do what I'm going to do in South Africa in certain parts of Asia, right? Nepal and South Africa, very different things. So what you have to do is say, what's needed here? What assets are here? There's a unifying framework, perhaps, and unifying understanding, but you have to this is where the work is, right? This is where the grunt work is to figure out, how do we make sure that we leverage what we have here to make that same difference?
Thank you so much, President Haile. I'm gonna go to 2 more questions. We've got a lot of them, but we also want to fit in 3 last closing comments from some of our community partners.
Sure.
If we can make maybe a speed round of questions and answers with starting with Andres Paz, Chair of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee.
Thank you, Amanda. I'll make it real quick. I've encountered a few organizations, a few employers, and even government who are sometimes afraid to cross the line or even break the law regarding providing equal opportunity versus discriminating when they're trying to hire. So are there any tips or best practices that we could follow?
Yeah, so look, you have to be careful around this kind of thing. So I'll give you one tip, because you got to stay legally compliant. There's no question about that. But what I would ask is this: most of the time we fail, particularly, and I hear you talking from employer perspective in hiring, we fail in recruiting, right? We get pools that are not diverse, or we have barriers that lead to a lack of diversity in the pools. Let me give you a very quick example. And this is an example that's very applicable today. It's not employment, but it applies, okay? We are seeing a disparity in vaccinations based on wealth and race. Why is that? There's a very supportable, evidence-supported theory, right? Because so many people think different things about it. But if I've asked you to get your vaccination appointment online and you don't have a computer, guess what? You're not getting your appointment. And so and there are things like this when we have to think about, what does the pool look like? And I mentioned to you before, those networks, are we engaging in outreach in networks, perhaps networks that don't look like us or don't go to the same restaurants as us, to make sure that they understand the opportunity to do it. And that's another one. That's an activity, right? It's not just posting it and say, I did it. It means going out there, making the calls, letting people know, and engaging in a very deliberate fashion to help strengthen the diversity of those pools. We are allowed to have a diverse pool, and being able to make sure that you pull from it and recruit as appropriate.
Thank you so much. From a timing perspective, I want to also include some of our community partners before we close with everything. So I'd like to hand it over to a few of our partners in education. First, with Superintendent Dr. Kamala Patton with Collier County Public Schools, then to Tessa Lesage with the Community Foundation of Southwest Florida, and then closing with Alex Bro, our Director of Work-Based Learning here at the Chamber. So Dr. Patton.
So thanks for letting us share. So everyone knows that Collier County Public Schools, and first off, Greg, thanks for sharing your story. Very fortunate to get to work with Greg, especially a lot in this last year and a half. So thanks for all you do and for talking to the best county folks here of 67. Greg, we appreciate it. That's us, Collier. Thanks. So you know that we have a very diverse school district, 104 languages and dialects. We're moving that graduation rate 19.7% to 92.2. So working on all those things. So still working very tirelessly, right, on all of that, meaning equity for kids, right? So whether it's the textbooks everybody has access to, ensuring that we have entrepreneur engineering programs, Cambridges across all of our schools, not just some. So those have been long journeys, but we also have to then stop and say, let's look at what's happening day in, day out in these classrooms, right? So we really took a deep look to do this. And what we did is we worked with TNTP and the opportunity myth, and really looked at it to look at national research, not just what we think, but what does the national research say about great assignments, strong instruction, deep engagement, and the fourth being high expectations. Kids will rise, but you have to give them those bars. So what we did find out, sure, we're doing okay, but we also could identify where are areas that we can strengthen from those 4 nationally known resources that do show an academic difference for kids. So working on those to deepen it, we talked about DEI here. So that was our next natural step, is where do we see the holes? How do we help fill those in? So in that, really looking to include and really decide that we don't all talk about equity the same. So let's develop an equity statement. So we had a lot of stakeholders in on this, lots of different folks, and now have a set equity statement. So when we use the term equity, people, whether you're a bus drivers, food service, teachers, principal, everyone knows what do we mean by equity and what's our target. So that goes right down to our instructional coaches, everything else. So the next step has been implicit bias training. We all have those biases. So now that's been a very interesting conversation, and we're able to expand those cohorts. So we're excited about that. Our cultural competency groups have now expanded even further. Books are very important. So as we look to expand which groups, as we train equal across schools, make sure all schools have that. Things like media specialists come up because they heavily influence kids about what books they pick out when they go to the media center. So making sure they help us, and ultimately really excited that with this year's instructional materials to be used next year, we actually changed our entire rubric, and we're now making sure that we have culturally sensitive components. So you can look at a lot of our books and they may not reflect kids or people in those books who make up our public schools. So excited because we want kids to have mirrors to see themselves, and that they gives them windows for other experiences.
Thank you so much.
And we lost you.
Dr. Patton, for some reason, our sound is not hearing you. Oh. Okay. So I'm going to message her, and then we will move on with Tessa. One moment, please. Okay, everybody. Sorry about that. So if someone is able to message Dr. Patton, for some reason we lost your sound. We're so sorry. But we're going to move on to Tessa in the meantime and see if we can, if there was anything that we missed, please let us know at the end. Not sure what happened because you weren't muted, but anyway, so sorry about that, not sure. So Tessa, are you here with us?
Thank you. Thanks, Amanda, and thanks, Michael, for having me. And thank you, President Haile. It is an absolute pleasure to meet you today and to hear you speak. A lot of what you said resonated with future makers. And so I'll start by saying that I have the privilege of leading the network that is the Future Makers Coalition. We serve the 5 counties of Southwest Florida: Hendry, Glades, Charlotte, Lee, and Collier. That makes us a little unique because we have some pretty rural places in there. There's a vast array of opportunity and challenges throughout our region. And we are so proud to have Collier County as a partner. Dr. Patton is 100% setting the bar in Collier County with the work that's going on in the school system there. But Future Makers is focused on systems change, and we are 100% committed to creating a more equitable future for Southwest Florida. We've been disaggregating our data. We use a collective impact model, so we are driven by data. We've been disaggregating our data by race and ethnicity for years, and every year we get better at that so that we can see where we really need to look at systems. We definitely have heard from the Future Makers Coalition Network that the biggest asset that we have are those connections and our ability to leverage those connections. When you have a problem, no single entity can solve a problem on its own. I'm literally echoing everything that President Haile has said this morning. No single entity can solve a problem on its own. So when you run up against a problem in your day job, you can pick up the phone, you know who the person is that you can connect with. I would say that where we have fallen short, despite equity being an imperative, is having the kind of representation in our coalition, in our leadership, I think honestly across the region, in terms of diversity and equity. And so one thing that Future Makers has done, and we've actually built this model off of the Broward County Children's Services Council conversation about systemic racism and implicit bias. what we've realized in our challenges around trying to address some of the policies and practices that lead to the outcomes that we're seeing in our education and workforce systems is that we believe the community needs a foundation of understanding of the structure of racism, the history, our local history, how it's still playing out today, and then what the implicit biases and some of the basic terms that we have to be comfortable talking about in our board meetings, in our staff meetings, in our network and collaborative meetings in order to be able to start to make change. If we don't have a shared understanding and a basic comfort level with being uncomfortable having these conversations, we really can't get to policy change. And so that's really where the Future Makers Coalition has focused over the last year. I am saddened that it's taken this long, but excited to see all of the momentum around DEI that's happening here in Southwest Florida. And I just look forward to being part of playing our role in that change. And if we can help in any way in doing this work going forward, we're happy to do it. And it has just been an honor and privilege to be here with you all today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tessa. Tessa, before you leave or stop, would you mind sharing a little bit with some of our business professionals about the trainings that you offer?
Yeah, so we have been holding 2 conversations about structural racism and implicit bias for free every month on Zoom. They started off in person, but COVID really put a wrench in that. And so we're doing them on Zoom. The Equity Action Team of Future Makers is doing that. But we've also engaged with businesses that have wanted to have those conversations with their staff. So for example, the city of Fort Myers actually paid the Future Makers Coalition Equity Action Team to come in and actually have the conversation with all 700 of their staff. And so we did that over a series of months. And if that's something that we can provide to help your organization to have some of those conversations, please feel free to reach out. You know, we are part of Collier County and we're here to help and serve you as well. We're very committed to providing that foundation and to help link folks up to other opportunities to learn and move the needle.
Thank you so much, Tessa. So I'd like to close with our very own Alex Bro here, our Director of Work-Based Learning here at the Chamber, to talk about how our Chamber is engaged with education as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, Gregory Haile. Amazing talk today. We really appreciate you being here with us today. So like Amanda said, I'm Alex Bro. I'm the Director of Work-Based Learning. And with the Chamber's Leadership Collier Foundation, our goal is to have all students have the opportunity to explore local careers and have experiences to help prepare them to enter into the workforce. For students to have these opportunities and experiences, we rely on a diverse group of business professionals to help provide these opportunities and volunteer their time to mentor, guide, and provide their expertise while showcasing the jobs available in the student's backyard. This is important too, because we want to develop and prepare these amazing students that our wonderful school district helps grow, but we want to also retain that talent. So our local economy has a skilled and talented and most importantly, diverse workforce. So this is your call to action. Create those opportunities for students. So students, they are great help for your organization. So if you want an intern to help you, CCPS actually has a grant. They have grant funds available right now for interns to work for you up to 150 hours. And they can help you with your organization with any of those needs that you have. And so if you want to inspire and possibly change the trajectory of students' future, I urge you to reach out to me. I would love to talk to you about these work-based learning opportunities that you can get involved with and volunteer and hopefully change some students' lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. So as we close, we're just after 1 o'clock. I just want to see, President Haile, any final comments before we close with you?
No, just again, it was an absolute privilege to be here. And obviously you all are doing incredible work. And if I can be supportive in any way hereafter, just don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much, President Haile. Virtual round of applause, everybody. To our President Haile, Chair of Leadership Florida, President of Broward College, thank you so much. Thanks to all of our partners in education that came to be with us today. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Thanks to Cotrenia Hood for leading this amazing conversation today. I can't wait to share this information moving forward. Thank you. And as we close, just a couple of quick announcements. Applications for Leadership Collier are open right now through April 2nd. So as graduates, you understand the importance of continuing to develop community leadership as we build a stronger Collier County. And what President Haile said is really struck me with, we fail in recruiting. So I really think that this is an opportunity for all of us in this moment to think about who we're recruiting this year to support this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So please think about that. Please support us with that. Now is the time. And last but not least, we have our next leadership lunch will be in a few months, date to be determined, but that will be focused on women in leadership. So please stay tuned for that. I hope to see you all there. With that, our program concludes. I thank you all for your time today and have a wonderful day.